You're a bad person. Aren't you just as bad for listening to such a bad woman? By the way, what about Linda? It's fine. I just can't see her as a woman anymore. My husband James and my sister Nancy. This isn't the first time they've met. But as soon as they're alone together, this happens. I felt something boiling up from deep within me. Leaving James and Nancy, the three of us headed to the zoo. It was a perfect day for a drive. Just as we entered the main road. Oh, that's right. What is it? Mama, I locked up the house. At that moment, both I and Steve probably froze. What she meant was the entrance to the basement where they should be. My name is Miller Linda, a 35-year-old housewife. Now, I live with my husband, James, who is 2 years older than me, and our 8-year-old daughter, Margaret. There were times I thought it might be nice to have one more child. In the end, there were 2 reasons why we only had Margaret. One was that I couldn't idealize the concept of siblings. I have one older sister. Our parents clearly favored her, even to an outsider. I didn't like our parents for favoring her or myself for resenting her. That's why I was afraid to give Margaret a sibling. My sister, Nancy, was adorable even from my younger eyes. She looked great in bright clothes, had big double eyelids, and a distinct, well-defined face. She always had a smile and was good at getting her way. On the other hand, I had hidden double eyelids. My thick black hair couldn't be styled in any way and always gave my mother a hard time. Linda's hair is impossible to make cute. I hated hearing my mother's sighs. The main reason I went to college in the city, got a job, and got married was to get away from my parents and my sister. From my sister and from my parents who favored her. But then Nancy came back home. I found out from a call from my mom. What's up? This is unusual. Well, Nancy has come back again. Again. Yes, again. Nancy has been married twice. The first time was right after she graduated from college. To be blunt, it was a shotgun wedding. Now they call it a blessed marriage, but back then it was very much because it happened. Her first husband, Smith, was 5 years older than her. They met at a mixer. And Nancy, being very assertive, pushed and pushed until she got pregnant before she started working, so they got married. At that time, Smith was considered a good match by our parents. At first, her in-laws thought they had a beautiful bride. But it didn't take long for Nancy's true nature to show. Within 5 years, her extravagant spending habits, which her parents had always indulged, became evident. Smith, who had been saving for their future home, found his savings squandered by Nancy and lost trust in her, leading him to seek a divorce. At the time, their son, Steve, was still young, so custody went to Nancy. Smith was deeply frustrated by this. But she seemed to stay with her next husband for quite a while. What happened? Well, she cheated. My mother's voice was heavy. A year after divorcing Smith, Nancy quickly found another partner and remarried. Being in her 20s played a significant role in this. A young, beautiful divorcee with a child. Her next partner was the manager of the store where she worked part-time. Her looks and charm played a big part again. And because she married the manager, she quit her part-time job to avoid any gossip. This time, I told her she had to stop overspending, but yes, her spending did calm down. The main reason was that her next partner had a lower income than Smith. This man had lost his parents early and inherited their house. That must have been what my sister was aiming for. No more spending on a future home. She probably realized that if she did that again, she would lose her support system. But as long as Steve was in elementary school, things were fine. As long as he was in elementary school. You know how it is, being a mother yourself. All those interactions with other moms. I nodded vigorously. Indeed, such interactions keep you busy and leave little time for anything else. But when Steve started middle school, those interactions stopped, and she got bored. Bored, and she cheated. Well, the men Nancy picks are always good partners, but not necessarily attractive as men. I was astonished. Did my mother really say that? So now, Nancy and Steve are staying with us. Hey Mom, by the way, since she got divorced over the affair, did she pay alimony? Do you think she could pay it? We had to cover it. Not, we advanced it. They're still being overly lenient. And Linda, she said she'd visit you from time to time. What? You've got to be kidding me. Why do I have to entertain my sister now? How can you say that? She's your only sister. Here we go again. You've always been cold, Nancy said so too. You rarely come back home. Of course. Why should I go back to a place where I feel uncomfortable? Please, Steve seems uncomfortable after changing schools so many times. When she said that, I was at a loss for words. My nephew, Steve, is really a good kid. In the end, they started coming to our house frequently. By some twist of fate, we now live in the neighboring state to my parents' house. And it takes less than an hour by car. Having a sister like Nancy is the first reason I couldn't idealize having siblings and didn't want more than one child. The second reason is that our marital relationship became strained after pregnancy and childbirth. It started with a job transfer and a move. When we first got married, we lived near the city centre. But after the pregnancy and childbirth, James suddenly got transferred. We had to move to a relatively large town. Then James suddenly said, "The land is cheap here. Let's build a house." He chose the eastern edge of the state, putting us an hour's drive from my parents' house on the western edge of the neighboring state. And that house was a bit unusual. No, it looked like a typical modern prefab house. But James built a basement in this house. I've always wanted an art studio. He said. This was news to me. I knew he was knowledgeable about art. He chose art museums for our dates before we got married. But I never thought he painted himself. Didn't I tell you, I was in the art club in high school, and I wanted to go to art school. But apparently, attending an art school was too expensive for James's family. It was something he always regretted. So when building a house, he wanted to have a studio. But why in the basement? Because I need the stable north-facing light. As a result, a semi-basement was created with the first floor elevated. The studio was placed where there was a window for light. But the space was too large just for a studio, so I decided to use half of the room as a storage area. In this area, it's always been said that a big earthquake would come someday. So, all houses are built with earthquake-resistant designs and keep emergency supplies. As soon as we moved in, I stocked up on various items and stored them there. I also used it to store outdoor gear we occasionally use and the fruit beer and miso I make as a hobby. The door to the inner studio is sturdy and locks from both the inside and outside. Once locked from the inside, it becomes James's dream space. Meanwhile, the entrance to the storage area has a simple latch. Because the inner door is so secure, we didn't put much emphasis on the storage door. James started spending every spare moment in that basement. "Mama, since we moved here, Papa doesn't play with me much." Hearing Margaret's sad words, I could only sigh. At first, it was still fine. But gradually, he brought in a small fridge, a spare futon, and a tablet. On the nights before his days off, he often stayed in the basement, only coming out to use the bathroom and shower on the first floor. "Hey, why don't you take Margaret to the amusement park once in a while?" "Are you trying to take away my only joy? Refreshing like this is how I get through my daily work." The arguments increased. and our marital life dwindled. I lived upstairs with Margaret. We originally had 2 semi-double beds in our bedroom, but one of them often went unused. I frequently ended up sleeping with Margaret. In the midst of this, Nancy started showing up at my place, bringing Steve along. "It's too noisy at home, and your place is spacious. Steve can study here, right?" She'd leave Steve and go off somewhere. Steve quietly did his homework, studied, and played with Margaret while waiting for his mother to return. One day, Nancy noticed our basement. "Oh, what's this?" "It's James's studio. He'll be mad if you go in, so don't, sis." "Whoa, a studio, James. You paint?" Was all Nancy said at the time. But that day, Nancy stayed unusually late. At the dinner table, where I had prepared extra food, she began to talk. "By the way, James, you paint?" "Oh yes, I'm embarrassed to say." "Not at all, it's a wonderful hobby." "Well, my wife isn't too thrilled about it." "Oh dear, but art is often hard for ordinary people to understand." I had a bad feeling about Nancy's sweet words. "Do you paint landscapes?" "Yes, mostly landscapes or still lifes now. In high school, I loved drawing portraits." "Portraits, you say?" Nancy's eyes widened. "In that case, why don't I be your model?" "What, sis, are you sure?" "I've always wanted someone to paint a picture of me." "But aren't you job hunting now, sis?" Yes, she was supposedly driving around for job hunting during the day. "What are you talking about? Even during a job hunt, you have days off, right?" "That's right. If it's on the weekend, I'm free too." "Besides, Linda, you don't know how much a model fee can be. It's really great when someone close offers to help." "Wait, so Dad, what about our picnic?" Yes, we had planned a rare picnic at the nearby zoo and botanical garden for the next weekend. Then Steve chimed in. "Hey, Margaret, would you mind if I went with you?" "Big brother." "Yeah, I've always wanted to visit the zoo and botanical garden here." "That's right, Linda. I'll borrow James, so you go with Steve." With a sly smile, Nancy grinned at me. This woman has set her sights on my husband. Just like before. "Well then, let's have a quick meeting now." "Sure." And with that, they headed to the basement, leaving their half-eaten dinner behind. We continued eating in front of their half-finished plates. "I'm sorry about my mom, Auntie." Steve greeted to me. "You don't have to do that, Steve. Besides, she's just a model." "Do you really think so?" He gave a bitter smile, unusual for a child. After a moment of silent eating, he stood next to me to help with the dishes. "Thanks, I appreciate it." "No problem, I'm used to it." Steve took on the role of drying the dishes and putting them away. But even while doing so, it seemed like he had something he wanted to say to me. "What's wrong?" "Auntie, actually." Steve's expression was desperate as he looked at me. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I whispered. I realized he probably didn't want Margaret to hear, so he helped me with the dishes to talk in private. Mom always seduces men like that. "Steve, you knew." "Yes, she kicked me out of the house to cheat the other day." A chill ran down my spine. "Really?" "Yes. Until recently, my stepfather was hard-working and treated me like his own son. But he often worked late into the night. And Mom took advantage of that, bringing men home. So, I took pictures and recorded her and told my stepfather." Steve bit his lip. I was so angry that such a good man was being treated like that. He gripped the dish towel tightly. Then, my stepfather thanked me for telling him and started the divorce process. "So, you were the reason for the divorce?" "Yes, it was unfair for such a good man to be deceived by my mother." My stepfather didn't reveal that I was the source of the evidence to avoid making my situation worse. I see. So why are you telling me this now? What do you want me to do? I think you should check on them downstairs in a little while. All right, I replied. 2 hours passed. Steve spent the time playing games with Margaret. Margaret, I love playing with you, big brother. This well-behaved child was excellent at keeping Margaret entertained. Between games, he searched for information about the zoo and botanical garden on the tablet, making Margaret excited about what they could see. While they happily played, I quietly made my way down to the basement. Both the storage room door and the inner door were left open. I entered the storage room silently, without turning on the light, and moved to a spot where I could see the inner room. There, in my line of sight, was Nancy sitting on the still life stand, embracing James. From a distance, I could see that Nancy's blouse buttons were undone. You're a bad person. Aren't you just as bad for listening to such a bad woman? By the way, what about Linda? It's fine. I just can't see her as a woman anymore. They both laughed softly, followed by sounds I couldn't bear to hear. This wasn't the first time they'd met. And now, as soon as they were alone together, this happened. I felt something boiling up from deep within me, but it didn't burst in angrily right then. The term art model is convenient. Even dressed like that, Nancy would probably calmly say, there are nude models too, right? And James would likely defend her by saying, it's to understand the body's lines. I needed something more definitive. Quietly, I slipped out and went back upstairs. When I returned, Steve looked at me and simply said, "See, I told you so." "What will you do, Auntie?" Steve asked again in a calm, mature tone. "I have an idea." "Okay, then I'll be ready for anything." And then the weekend arrived. Saturday, the sky was clear, warmer than expected. I thought we could have our picnic on the lawn at the zoo and botanical garden. So I was looking for outdoor gear in the storage room with Margaret. At this point, the inner door was already closed. Nancy had brought Steve over and quickly went into James's studio, closing the door behind her. We couldn't know what was happening behind that door. What do we need? A mat and, let's see. Thinking about the possibility of strong winds, I added a pop-up tent. And pegs and ropes to keep it from blowing away. "Auntie, are tents allowed?" "We'll check at the entrance." As we chatted, we carried everything out. Since both Steve and I had our hands full, we left the door open. Then the three of us got in the car and set off. It was a perfect day for a drive. As we entered the main road, Margaret suddenly said, "Oh, that's right." "What is it?" "Mom, I locked the door." "What?" "Well, you and Big Brother both had your hands full. It's not good to leave it open when we're going out, right?" At that moment, both Steve and I froze. Margaret knew about the studio, but didn't fully understand what it was. James handled all the cleaning and maintenance of the studio himself, telling me not to touch anything. So, to prevent Margaret from entering and moving things, we usually kept the inner door locked during the day. But today... "Hey, Margaret, why did you lock the storage room?" Steve asked Margaret. "Well, the door to the back room, which is always closed tight, was slightly open." "Mom, you always say we need to keep it locked, right? But I don't know where the key for the back room is. So, I thought it might be okay to lock it from the outside." "Oh, I see. The inner door has a proper lock, but the outer one is just a latch. So even Margaret could lock it." "I see. That's right." I pictured the situation and felt a smile creeping onto my face. Then I said to Margaret, "Hey, Margaret, after this, let's go visit Grandpa and Grandma on Dad's side." "Really?" Is that okay? This part was already planned. Visiting the in-laws was part of the plan. It's been a while, so let's stay overnight. I added that detail. Then, the following evening, after enjoying dinner, breakfast and lunch at my in-laws' house, which was a 2-hour drive from the zoo and botanical garden, we were about to leave. We should get going. No, stay a bit longer. We were debating over tea when the classic ringtone of a phone interrupted. Oh, it's mine. Hello, police. What's going on, Linda? Put it on speaker, please. Following my father-in-law's request, I switched to speaker mode and answered the call. Hello. Sorry to bother you. This is the police from XX County. Is this Miller Linda's phone? Yes, this is Miller Linda. It was noisy in the background, with the sound of sirens wailing. Did something happen? Yes, we received reports from neighbors about the sound of glass breaking and a bad smell coming from your basement. What? I exclaimed in surprise. What happened? James said he was staying home today. Yes, but what could it be? I said to my in-laws. They are truly wonderful people who adore their rarely seen granddaughter, Margaret. The only concern they had was about their son building a house far away, which they occasionally complained about over the phone. Compared to my parents, they are incredibly reasonable. They even welcomed my nephew, Steve, with open arms. I asked the police. So, what exactly happened? Well, it seems the one who broke the window was your husband, Miller James. Could you explain in more detail? Let me explain it step by step. All right, Margaret, let's go play a game somewhere else. Okay. Reading the room, Steve took Margaret away. It was definitely not a story for Margaret to hear. Then the police officer began explaining to us. A neighbor, returning from shopping, heard the sound of breaking glass and peeked into our house. Hesitant at first, the neighbor, who's part of our local contact network, entered our yard to find out which window it was. It turned out to be the basement window that usually went unnoticed. Alarmed, the neighbor looked through the broken window and smelled a terrible odor. Seeing a naked man and woman wrapped in blankets and sheets, huddling in pain, the neighbor quickly called the police. One of the naked people was James. The expressions on my in-laws' faces twisted in disbelief as they heard this. What on earth is he doing? Setting aside my father-in-law's anger, I continued the conversation. I hear ambulance sirens. What's going on? Yes, when we arrived, they said they were trapped and injured, so we called an ambulance and rescue team. That's quite an operation. The sighs from my in-laws grew louder. The front door was locked, so for security reasons, we removed a window and sent in a team to rescue them. Thank you, but what kind of injuries are we talking about? James tried to climb out the window when he fell off a platform and hurt his back. My in-laws were stunned, their mouths hanging open. I had one more thing to confirm. Was the other woman by any chance named Nakashima Nancy? She's my sister. Ah, your sister, yes. She identified herself as such. We also contacted her family. The bad smell was coming from her. The police officer's voice hesitated. What happened? Well, she identified herself as your sister. The smell was coming from her. What? It seems that since yesterday, she got cold or something. There were a lot of beer cans around. This woman, while undressed, had diarrhea, and there were a lot of excretions all over your basement. What? She tried to clean herself using the emergency drinking water stored in the basement, which caused even more mess. The clothes lying around got soaked too, affecting both of them. At the mention of the clothes, my in-laws' faces twisted in horror. So, which hospital is my husband in now? The police provided the name and address of the hospital and ended the call. Even I couldn't fully grasp the situation at that moment. I knew we had locked them in. We expected to find evidence of their affair later by thoroughly examining the studio. But this was unexpected. Of course, if they were locked in, they couldn't use the bathroom. And then it escalated to involve the police, an ambulance, and a rescue team. Auntie, get a grip. Realizing the call had ended, Steve rushed in and shook me. Then he turned and greeted to my in-laws. I'm really sorry about my mother. I needed to support his impromptu apology. Steve, you heard. I heard the name Nakashima Nancy. I'm sorry, that's my mom. She was targeting Uncle. What so? She said she'd be a model. I raised my voice deliberately. Yes, she used me to get them out. No way. I'm really sorry, Auntie. No, a child shouldn't have to apologize for this. Father-in-law, mother-in-law, could you please go to James? Yes, we need to understand the situation properly. But Linda, what about you? I'm sorry, father-in-law, mother-in-law. I don't know what to do right now. I'm so shaken that I might cause an accident if I drive. All right then, we'll go check on him. Thank you so much. I greeted to them. After they left, Steve and I shook hands firmly, having pulled off our act perfectly. Now, 2 weeks later, my lawyer reported that things were looking good. Yes, I had stayed at my in-laws' house and continued with my next steps. First, I called the neighbor who discovered them and got detailed information about the rescue. She's a kind person, very good at spreading gossip quickly. I had always maintained a good relationship with her to prevent any harmful rumors, and it paid off now. You know, with all the police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances in the neighborhood, it drew quite a crowd. And your husband, well, what can I say? What can I say? I encouraged her to continue. And that other woman, she smelled so bad. What could she have eaten to smell like that? When I revealed that that woman was my sister. Really? So you're saying your husband's been having an affair with your sister? Her voice was full of excitement. So I responded in the strongest voice I could muster. Yes, it seems that way. Though she said, poor you. She couldn't hide her excitement. Thanks to her, I knew there were plenty of witnesses to the affair. The neighbors had already seen the scandal. With my words, the news would quickly spread about who was involved. Next, I looked for a lawyer who could secure favorable terms for divorce and a restraining order against Nancy. At that time, I didn't even want to see James's face. So, I planned to handle everything through my lawyer. To Margaret, who asked, "Can't we go home?" I explained, "A burglar broke into our house." In a way, that's true. The burglar took Daddy away. Margaret tilted her head, looking confused. This young child had likely lost all hope and affection for a father who had stopped playing with her. Meanwhile, James's desperate calls didn't stop. Of course, I ignored all of them while recording the voicemails. It seems he broke his back when he fell and will be in the hospital for a while. According to my in-laws, not only Nancy but also James smelled terrible. My own child, I can't believe it. My mother-in-law said. She was furious about James's affair with her favorite daughter-in-law's sister and lectured him at the hospital. My father-in-law was equally disgusted and said he would cut ties with James. Probably as a result of their scolding, James left more and more messages on my voicemail. "Hey, what's going on? I'm injured. Why aren't you visiting? Did you lock me in? The lawyer came, and you're filing for divorce. I won't agree to it. Margaret locked the door. That's impossible. Hey, why is there a video of us online? Did you do this? All right, I'll agree to the divorce, but the alimony amount is outrageous. Please, if we sell the house, The state of the basement is so bad we can't find a buyer. Lower the alimony. I'm begging you. Please pick up the phone just once. By the end, his voice was already tearful. Incidentally, Nancy also called me. But her words were so incoherent that as soon as I recognized it was her, I turned the volume to 0. I couldn't let Margaret hear such abusive language. Meanwhile, Steve contacted his biological father. Mom never gave me Dad's phone number, but Grandma gave me the landline number for emergencies. Emergencies. Yeah, Grandma was really upset that she couldn't get custody of me. Back then, there wasn't enough evidence, so I ended up with Mom. I see. But after this incident, I'm sure they'll see she's unfit to be a parent. I hope so. Steve said with determination in his voice. Even my name, which Mom gave me, caused a lot of teasing. Really? If it had to be Steve, I wish she'd chosen different characters. People would tease me, saying, "Hero, really? A brave hero." I've changed schools twice, and both times it was the same. Well, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Steve. Well, not exactly a flashy name. It was the kind of name that gave classmates something to tease about, especially for a transfer student. It used to be famous because of a baseball player, but now it's more the latter. My dad said he was against it, so for that alone, I've always wanted to be with him. I see. So, thank you, Auntie, for giving me this chance. No, thank you, you know. Your mom always liked taking things from me. Oh, really? Steve looked up at the sky. But people aren't things. Anyone who gets caught up with her is at fault too. If someone has a family, they should turn down her advances. Since he couldn't do that, he's also at fault. So, I continued to Steve. We've both cut ties with bad influences and are better off for it. Now, about the two of them. My divorce was finalized. I got full custody of Margaret, and it was decided that James would pay alimony and child support. He had to sell his dream house to cover the costs, but the house was devalued due to the incident and the state of the basement. That's why you're an idiot. Studios and studies are things you build after your kids are grown and independent. My father-in-law left saying those words and declared he would cut ties with James. My mother-in-law, fed up with her son's complaints about Margaret locking the door, supported her husband. They both wanted to see their grandchild. They had been very kind to me, so I planned to continue my relationship with them. Meanwhile, Nancy and my parents were furious that I was claiming alimony from them. However, my lawyer informed them, Linda has renounced her inheritance. She wants to cut all ties with you. If you do anything inappropriate, she will seek a restraining order. In response, Nancy grabbed a vase and struck my lawyer. This was clear assault, so my lawyer pressed charges, and Nancy ended up spending some time in jail. To pay further alimony, my parents had to sell their house. That's the result of their pampering. Oh well. Mom, I'm off. Have a good day, sweetie. After that, I moved a bit farther away. Far away from both my hometown and the previous house. Good morning. As I greeted everyone at work, my current employer responded with a morning greeting. Let's have another great day. It was Steve's father, Smith. I now work as a clerk at his company. It's not a big company, but it is an honest, locally rooted business. On our days off, Margaret often asks me to take her to visit Steve at his father's place. The Smith family always welcomes us warmly, thankful that Steve could return to them. These people are also much kinder compared to my own parents. Finally, I have found a peaceful environment. From now on, I will work hard to ensure that Margaret has a bright and joyful life.